cancel culture. Is it real? And more importantly, is it going to directly affect your life? Will you feel any of those consequences, or will it be just something that Hollywood has to deal with? Also, I want to tell you about the first time I had devastating effects for speaking out. For instance, that time I got fired for talking on social media. Then I'm going to talk about the mysterious disappearance of COVID-19. It's gone now. And then we're going to talk about a truly racist part of our country and the number one killer of Black individuals in America. My name is Elisa Steele. This is Deconstructing the Culture. All right, then, podcast family, we have a lot of new listeners this week, especially last week's episode on racism and white supremacy was something that obviously resonated with both you regular podcast listeners who are part of the podcast family and also a lot of new listeners. So welcome back to all of the new listeners for this episode. I hope that maybe if you disagreed with me, which many of you did on last week's episode about racism and white supremacy, that you would reach out to me, continue to reach out to me, share with me, articles, facts, links, your perspective on racism. And I am more than open to hearing that. Now, many of you, of course, who might not have agreed with last week's episode aren't watching this week's episode, but thank you nonetheless for those who took the time to listen to last week's episode, to challenge yourself, listen to something maybe you didn't agree with. So this week, I'm going to touch on a few different issues that I wasn't able to touch on last week. Last week was a very long episode, and I don't even feel like I touched the surface of everything that we need to talk about on that issue. So we're going to talk about a little bit of that today and cancel culture. Now, I want to address a video that actually went viral hardcore last week, actually featuring Candace Owens. She does a show for PragerU, and you guys know I'm a huge supporter of PragerU, but Candace, while we don't always agree, released a video that had, I think, over 100 million views. I think on Facebook alone was over 70 million views, and she smashed the idolized version of George Floyd and brought up some really interesting points about his character. Now, obviously, I'm going to put this out there. Those who have ill will towards me will accuse me with racism or whatever regardless. But obviously, George Floyd, in case I haven't said this for the umpteenth million time, George Floyd didn't deserve to die the way he did. That was an injustice. And especially as Christians and as believers, we should always want justice and believe in justice for all of mankind because we are image bearers of God. So of course, 100%, 100,000% for those of you who are going to come after me and call me a racist, I don't think George Floyd deserved to die the way he did. With that said, some of the interesting points that Candace Owens brought up in her viral video, which I then further investigated and looked into just because I don't want to take, someone on the internet's word for it. I went in and researched what she brought up and found out it to be absolutely true that George Floyd had a less than clean record with the law. He had already served time, 5 times. Four of those times were for drug offenses, and the last time was actually truly kind of evil and dark, and especially it felt especially offensive to me because I'm imagining myself in that situation. Essentially, the long and short of it is George Floyd and some pals decided to rob a woman's home and rifle through it looking for drugs or money. They ended up, stealing from her, but George Floyd in that act with his buddies or whoever he was with, he held a gun to this woman's head, and then she was pregnant, very visibly pregnant apparently, and held the gun to this woman's, pregnant stomach. And I'm imagining myself in that situation and how horrifying that would be. And then I'm imagining that woman today who survived. I'm imagining that woman today, I don't know her name, watching the news about George Floyd and watching his picture being painted and being spread all over as a monument, as a martyr, as a symbol of Black Lives Matter and as a symbol of injustice. And yes, while he did die in a very unjust way, I don't know that necessarily it's the best thing for us to paint him as this glorified, saintly image, which many have. Now, I've read that according to his family and friends, he was a believer, and if that is indeed the case, and that is good, maybe he was on, what I've seen a lot of is a lot of people have said, well, he was on a better road. He, his last offense was, years before, or I believe 5 years before. And while I would love to believe that, yes, he had turned his life around, and maybe he had to some degree, you also have to look at the actual facts in front of us that his autopsy reports came back showing that he was under the influence, high on meth. So, maybe I would like to believe that that was a one-time slip up, but it would be easy to see that maybe this is a pattern, and has already shown that it's a pattern for George Floyd's life. Not to say he should have died in an unjust manner. He deserved justice, just like anyone in America. We have rights. But at the same time, I don't think it's good for us to gloss over the fact that he was a criminal. He was a thug. He was a less than saintly person and did some truly despicable, evil things that we should recognize as a whole package. And again, this is why we, as conservatives, I feel like are always saying, wait for the evidence. Let's wait for all the evidence. And this is obviously not evidence that he should have died the way he did, but it is evidence as to this was a systematic problem for him, not necessarily something where the police this is the first time he's ever even been pulled over or anything, any kind of consequences with the law. No, this was an ongoing pattern for him to be a lawbreaker. So just bringing that up because that is something to take into account in understanding the full scenario of George Floyd's life and what brought him to that moment. Now, I want to bring up something that I'm seeing a lot on social media, and I know you've been seeing it too, because I'm telling you, I'm at a point now where I am just kind of ready to put the madness and the constant upheaval of racism behind me. I'm kind of over it. I'm just like, come on, no, you can't just keep slandering the country that I love, America, and calling it evil, 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 systemically racist to the core, never got it. No, that's not true. None of the stats show that, and just human experience of most people I know show that that's not the case. Now, something that I'm seeing, and it's not allowing me to, and probably it's not allowing you and I to move forward and try and live our lives the best we can, because every business and sub-business, whether we care about them or not, at some point, if we subscribe to them, and we got on their mailing list, everyone from Lyft or Uber or every single business you can possibly think of is emailing me or putting on their social media about what they're going to do to fight racism, systemic racism. So we can't even get away from it. It's this constant, disgusting media cycle. And I know you're getting this too. One of the main things that I'm seeing, especially from influencers, I don't really like that term, but influencers on social media, is how we're going to support Black businesses. We're going to promote Black businesses. Well, I have a question. Isn't that racist to support Black businesses, to go out of my way to identify someone's color of their skin and then support them whether or not the color of their skin fits what I'm looking for? Isn't that the definition of racism? The answer is yes, that is racist. If we're going out of way to intentionally identify people and then treat them differently based on their skin color, that is the definition of racism. Now, and you just turn that around. It's very simple. Anytime you wonder if you should say something or if it's racist, turn it around for a different color and you can pretty much find out whether or not you should say that. So turn that phrase around and say, if half of our world was going around saying support white businesses, oh my goodness, the whole world would come down, and rightfully so, because you shouldn't support white businesses. You shouldn't care. You should support quality businesses that you believe in, businesses with quality product, businesses with good customer services, businesses that deserve support. But no, a business doesn't deserve support based on the owners or founders having a certain pigment of skin color. The same way I wouldn't say ever support white businesses. I'm not going to say support Black businesses. I'm going to say support good and worthy businesses. Now, some people have come out and told me, well, Elisa, you're like the biggest person to talk about supporting businesses. And you're always saying support pro-life businesses and support veteran-owned businesses. That's different, highly different. If you can't see it, let me walk you through it. It's very, very simple. One is a cause, a belief system, something worthy, cause, to an ideology to support and get behind. The other is an arbitrary pigment of skin and racist. Okay? So yes, I am going to go out of my way to support, for instance, Culture of Life. You know that I wear their clothes basically every day. They support pro-life businesses, or excuse me, pro-life organizations, and a percentage of their proceeds go towards supporting the pro-life movement because I believe in saving babies, whether they're Black, white, Asian, all colors of the rainbow. I support not killing human beings. So yes, I can get behind that cause, but no, I'm not going to arbitrarily support a business because someone has a skin pigment that is slightly darker than my own. That is ridiculous, okay? Sorry, I keep messing with this thing behind me. In case you didn't notice, if you're watching, I'm in a totally different place. I am visiting family, so I found a corner of the guest room that I'm in, and it happens to have this cool light fixture, but I keep bumping it, so forgive me, I'm gonna try not to touch that. Now, let's also talk about white privilege. I know I talked about that in a lot more in the last episode, so I'm not gonna spend a whole lot of time on it today, but something that I didn't cover, an aspect of white privilege and the idea, which I believe white privilege is a racist lie, but something that I didn't address in last week's episode is the fact is by promoting the idea that white privilege exists, we are inherently telling anyone of color, anyone with a darker pigment colored skin, that they are inherently less privileged, which I think is gross and evil and wrong. I actually, again, I found a tweet by Candace Owens that really resonated with me. And she says, if you believe everything that is wrong with Black America is the fault of white people, then you believe in white supremacy. If you believe Blacks will only get better by and through the actions of white people, then their supremacy is implied. I've never bought into that. Absolutely. I absolutely resonate with that tweet. A girl I've never heard of, actually, I found her tweets too. Her name is Melissa. Her handle, it doesn't have a last name, Melissa A. But Melissa tweeted, and I thought this was really interesting. She's a mom, and she tweeted, white privilege is an offensive term to me as a Black person. It automatically assumes that I am inferior. No matter what I do or achieve, I will never be privileged because I have the disability of being Black. I live in a she says, I live a privileged life because of the choices that I have made, which is absolutely true. She continues, I would never subject my children to that kind of inferiority mentality. Good for her. Imagine being a Black child being brainwashed into believing that they are inferior and can't achieve as much as their classmates because they have a different skin color. She actually even says, I pulled my son out of Catholic school after they announced they were going to have white privilege classes. She's like, so you're going to tell my son at 3 years old that he's oppressed and will never be privileged, but his classmates will by virtue only the color of their skin. She says, imagine a white child being brainwashed into believing they are guilty and have to live their life apologizing for the skin color God gave them. White privilege, white guilt. The narrative is pure evil. It's demonic. Reject it. Run the other way. Absolutely spot on, Melissa. I 100% believe this. The same way that I believe that teaching white privilege to white people is wrong, and it teaches them that oh, by the way, you're superior and you need to apologize for your superiority. That's wrong, and it's also a lie. But it's also teaching anyone of color as a child to believe that they're automatically inferior, and that is also wrong and a lie and evil. And it does create, I'm sorry, but a victim mentality. And that is what is wrong with, quite frankly, a lot of the generations coming, especially out of our very liberal college campuses, is this victim mentality. You're a victim if you have darker skin. You're a victim if you are attracted to the same sex. You're a victim for XYZ. No. You are privileged because you live in America. And there are other privileges, and those come individually. But to say that someone is automatically inferior because of their race and because of their pigment of their skin, no, that is racist, and we should reject that lie with everything in us. Now, let's talk about this crazy idea to defund the police. Last week I talked about the idea, I told you some basic reasons as to why I would never use the hashtag, or I should say, why I would never support or promote the hashtag Black Lives Matter or the organization, because they believe in some truly evil things that go against my values, and you can listen to that in last week's episode. One thing that I did not mention that they are a huge proponent of, and it's very widely documented, you can find this easily on their website or in press releases, but Black Lives Matter also has been a huge supporter of defunding the police, which until recently was a really in the minority opinion. Very few people felt that way. And the truth is I believe it was something like 20% of people believed in defunding the police, because it's kind of a crazy radical idea. And I thought, the world was sane enough to never actually pursue that. But it's gone from, in the last couple of weeks, an insane outlier idea to now an almost reality in Minneapolis. It's literally nuts. On Sunday, just this last Sunday, a couple of days ago, the Minneapolis City Council vowed to shut down the city's police department. 9 of the council's 13 members pledged to begin dismantling the local police department as it exists. Minneapolis City Council President Lisa Bender is standing by the council's plan to disband the local police department, and she responded to people who might be concerned about not having police to call if someone breaks into their house by saying that their concerns came from a place of privilege. Because don't you know, if you're worried about crime, if you're worried about if you've been raped and who to call, that's because you're coming from a place of privilege. Don't you know? Yeah, wait, what? Okay, you want to say that, and yeah, you're willing to say it's coming from a place of privilege. Well, it's pretty easy for cushy people of all colors and liberal, crazy Hollywood in their fancy private security guarded homes to say, yeah, disband the police, because they have private security. They live in gated upper class neighborhoods. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that instead of them advocating for poor and lower class neighborhoods, and in many cases neighborhoods of a lot of color, they're advocating for the police to go away there. They're advocating for those people to not have protection. But let's just reverse that. Let's just say, you know what, we're going to leave those neighborhoods. We're only going to get rid of the police in your neighborhood. And also, by the way, you can't have private security. Then let's see how you feel when you become a target because your address is easily known and you are in the public spotlight, and every super fan and person who hates your guts comes after you, and you have no police to call and no private security. Let's see how you feel about it then. Sure, it's easy for you, leftist Hollywood and leftist insanity, to call for the disbanding and the defunding of police, but let's see what that looks like when it actually affects you. Now, Lisa Bender, she says here, quote, "I know that concerns over having no law enforcement comes from a place of privilege," she insisted. "For those of us whom the system is working, I think we need to step back and imagine what it would feel like to already live in a reality where calling the police may mean more harm is done." So essentially she's saying, you have to imagine that, where these Black people are coming from, they know that if their house is being broken into, they can't call the police because more harm will be done to them. BS on that. Absolute BS on that. That's a figment of her imagination. Zero stats, zero studies, zero evidence backs that up. Because I can tell you right now, it doesn't matter what color skin you are, your home's being broken into, or your daughter's been raped, you do call the police. And no, you're not worried about more harm being done when you're actively being held at gunpoint, or your family members are being held at gunpoint in your own home. You're still calling the police. That's just absolutely ridiculous and a flat out lie. And this brings me to my next point, which is guns. I never, ever want to hear someone self-righteously tell me that, well, we don't need guns in America. That's why we have police, because only law enforcement should have guns. Well, now the leftist narrative is so confused right now. They're saying, no, individuals, you can't have a gun. You're a menace to society if you protect your Second Amendment rights to keep and bear arms. But no, the police don't have guns either. Basically, the only people who have guns are the bad guys. Yeah, the criminals and the thugs who want to harm you, they can have the guns, but nobody else should have guns. That is absolute, absolute disgusting agenda to push, because you know who will suffer? The innocents and those in poor neighborhoods. And you know what? Having lived in a poor neighborhood when I was a little girl, I can tell you right now, um, actually, I'm not even going to go there, but let's just leave it to your own history. I'm sure at one point many of us have lived in less than desirable neighborhoods, or have friends or family who have, or ancestors who lived in less than desirable communities. But no, disbanding the police, defunding the police, and stripping United States citizens of their right to protect themselves is an absolute recipe for disaster. That is what's happened in Mexico. Without going on a long trail on that, you can hear my thoughts on that when I talked about the LeBaron attack on my family a few episodes, actually a few months ago in November. But that's what's happened in Mexico. The citizens don't have the right to bear arms, and the police and law enforcement there are corrupt. So, I'll just leave it to your imagination what happens to the citizens. Now, this truth is, and what I think is interesting, slightly encouraging, but also alarming to show just how worried Americans are, but encouraging that many people are taking advantage of their Second Amendment rights, is gun sales have actually reached all-time record heights in the past 3 months, with more than 6 million guns sold in the United States since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic in March. And this is information from the Washington Free Beacon. They reported that 6 million includes 7.1 million sold in May, typically a slower spring month, according to the Free Beacon, which is an all-time record for that month, and an 80% increase from May 2019. Gun sales at the end of the month may have been boosted by the widespread riots and looting in major cities in response to the Minneapolis police killing of George Floyd. The Free Beacon says, quote, "The record-setting sales pace has been driven in large part by new gun owners." You guys, we're talking about people who have never owned a gun before. This is a wake-up call between the pandemic and then these riots and then this insanity of this defunding the police. These are new gun owners. And this is according to the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the gun industry's trade group. They say, "Our recent survey of firearm retailers show us that 40% of these gun buyers are buying a firearm for the very first time," Mark Olivia, spokesman for the group, said in a statement. Of those first-time gun owners, 40% are women. So we're talking about, take 40% of all of those 6 million guns, 40%, almost half, are new gun buyers. And then of that 40% of that are women buying, and those buyers are overwhelmingly purchasing handguns for personal protection. So these are not necessarily hunting rifles, these are handguns. People are worried about their personal safety and their rights, and the fact that our government is, quite frankly, becoming tyrannical. I think there's a lot of conservatives and preppers who are also worried about a tyrannical government, which is another podcast altogether, about the abuse that our government has been putting its citizens through, and absolute abuse and usurpation of our power. But now let's talk about actual racism, because I told you, and I've been very open with this, racism does exist. I am not denying, nor will I ever deny, that racism exists, because it 100% does exist, okay? And when we see racism, we should condemn it for what it is: evil, disgusting, despicable. It's against our laws and should be prosecuted. Racism is despicable. One area of racism that is most alarming, and should be most alarming to many, because it's the number one killer of Black Americans today, but is not, just conveniently not being addressed at all by the left, is abortion. And I didn't touch on this in last week's podcast episode because there was so much to cover, but many of you saw me sharing about this on Instagram, and I want to share about it here. Is the truth is racism absolutely exists, and it exists in huge parts in the abortion industry. The fact is Black babies in New York, the numbers recently came out, and I actually talked about it in a previous episode. Black babies in New York actually have a higher chance of, they're more likely to be aborted than actually being born. That's devastating. That's awful. Abortion is actually 3 to 5 times higher for Black women than for white. That's terrible. That's so sad. I think it's sad for abortion to happen at all, but it just shows the imbalance in the abortion industry. Blacks are only 13% of the population, but because even though they're only 13% of our population, they make up for 36% of abortions. That's not good. That is so sad. And the truth is, I'm gonna tell you why I know it's directly linked to racism, but again, in New York City, a Black baby is more likely to be aborted than born, and this is not an accident. Because the truth isn't, and this is something that Planned Parenthood doesn't like to talk about, but their founder, Margaret Sanger, was a total racist. She spoke for the KKK, okay? She supported segregation. She disdained minorities and the poor, and she advocated for forced sterilization, and she created the, quote, Negro Project, unquote, to reduce the Black population. This is not by accident. This is by design from the root and founding of Planned Parenthood. In fact, the truth is if you look around, you're going to find a lot more Planned Parenthoods more prevalently in minority and in poor neighborhoods than anywhere else. And also, I just want to point out, in case it wasn't obvious, Margaret Sanger was also a supporter of eugenics. So it's no coincidence that today's abortion rate is the leading killer of Black individuals. It's by design from the history and the beginning of Planned Parenthood. And it's disgusting and it's evil and it's racist, and it should be called out for the disgusting racist act that it is. And I've seen a lot of people say, no, don't talk about abortion, you crazy pro-lifers. We're talking about real racism, and here you are trying to use this argument to talk about abortion. No, we're not using this time to talk about abortion. We've been talking about this for years. And if you want to spotlight racism, us too. We think racism is bad too. Now let's talk about it where it's hurting people of color, as the left would say, but let's talk about how it's hurting Black babies and Black women and Black families. Let's talk about the biggest killer of Black individuals in America today, and it's not police brutality. While that is evil and wrong and should be called out for what it is, let's also talk about the fact that that abortion and racism in abortion is a bigger problem than police brutality. So don't tell us we're trying to change and hijack your narrative. This is the narrative. You want to talk about racism? Absolutely, I will talk about racism. It is wrong, it is evil. Let me tell you where it's at. Let's address it together. But no, the left doesn't want to address it unless it fits their narrative, unless it has to do with defunding the police and growing the government. And no, abortion doesn't fit their narrative. So, of course, they're not going to talk about racism where it truly is a systemic problem, and that's in the abortion industry. Now, before I continue on and we wrap up, we're going to actually continue. We're going to talk about briefly COVID, and we're going to talk about cancel culture. J.K. Rowling is being hounded by the mob, and I'm going to tell you about the time I got cancel culture in my own life and fired for speaking out on social media. But if you could just take a moment right now to subscribe, leave a review, leave a 5-star review on iTunes, I would especially be meaningful because it actually does help tremendously with the rankings. If you're on YouTube, please not just subscribe, but the truth is subscriptions don't mean as much today on YouTube as they used to. What actually really matters is when you subscribe and click the notification button so that when new content comes out, you are the first to know. But not only that, not even just the first to know, that you actually know when new contents come out. So please, if you're on YouTube, hit that little bell that notifies you when content comes out. And then if you are on iTunes, go ahead and leave a review. And like I said last week, it would be awesome if you want to write something positive, but you don't have to. Just leave a 5-star review and then write anything. I don't care. You can even tell me what you don't like about my podcast. Maybe the sound of my voice irritates you. One person told me I said they tell me I said literally too often, which I probably totally did. But you can tell me that. Just leave a 5-star review while you're at it. Now, let's talk about COVID for like 5 seconds, because that's how much time the mainstream media is giving it right now, is about 5 seconds of airtime. COVID has magically disappeared, don't you know? Also, COVID knows a good cause when it sees it, don't you know? Because, when you are advocating outside of Planned Parenthood and protesting in front of Planned Parenthood, and you were there offering pro-life services in front of abortion clinics, no, you were arrested and you were definitely going to get COVID and kill grandma. At least that's what we were told. and all those things did happen. But no, if you're protesting George Floyd's death, and if you want to steal a flat screen TV from Target, COVID knows a good cause when it sees it. It's not going to infect you, and grandma will be just fine, because that is what our media is telling us. And I know I'm being lighthearted about it, but truly one of the things that just makes me angry and just really, really, really saddens my heart is hundreds of thousands of Americans are suffering because they didn't get to be with their loved ones during their dying moments, and they didn't get to come together for a funeral and a celebration of their loved one's life and to mourn them properly. And we were told we couldn't go to graduations, and we were told we couldn't get married and celebrate our marriage, and we were told we couldn't have baby showers. We were told that all of those would kill us. But if you want to go to George Floyd's funeral, a man who was unjustly killed, who was also a thug and a criminal, if you want to go to his funeral and also steal some items and loot some stores while you're at it, then you're totally fine. You're safe. You're totally good. That's what the media is telling us. And I just think it's sad and disgusting that so many people had to suffer and miss their dream wedding and miss that baby shower and miss that funeral and miss being with their loved ones as they were dying. But yet we can go to George Floyd's funeral, which had thousands and thousands of people at his funeral. Just disgusting. All right, now let's address cancel culture. Now, for a lot of us, we think cancel culture, while it's real and it's a thing, we think it doesn't really affect us. We think, oh, that'll affect Hollywood because, they'll lose jobs and opportunities because of their opinions, but it doesn't affect me in my everyday life. Well, it actually kind of does. And an example from a couple of weeks ago is what comes to mind, and I wanted to bring it up in a different light than how it was being discussed. Before we get to that, I just want to point out that J.K. Rowling, who is part of the Hollywood leftist elite, is suffering the effects of wanting to be canceled by leftists because she came out on Twitter and said that basically there are two genders. She wrote, quote, "If sex isn't real, then there's no such thing as there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth." Now, good for her for finding her line that she's not willing to cross and standing by it. That's great. But she is suffering hardcore because the comment went viral. She got more than 50,000 replies as of when I looked it up a bit ago. I'm sure it's way over that now. But one thing is very clear. The left is very, very angry that how dare J.K. Rowling come out in affirmation of science, because we're science deniers, don't you know? We believe sex and gender are two different things, and also they don't exist. Gender is and sex, they're a spectrum. But some of her comments are, one person responded, "Literally no one said the concept of sex or women is erased. The only thing erased is here is you erasing the legitimacy of trans folks. Please reconsider where you stand here for trans folks and for so many who used to idolize you." So, their perfect image of their leftist friend is being broken. Another person said, "I feel heartbroken for every trans kid who grew up on Harry Potter, only to find out that the author of the beloved childhood books is a transphobic bigot." So you're talking about the 11 trans kids out there. They're going to be traumatized, and the rest of the world that does believe in science and knows that there is male and female, they're going to be reaffirmed in the fact that yes, science is real and there are men and there are women. But that's ridiculous, and that's just an example of cancel culture, the left wanting to come out and all together just cancel her as a human and anything she has to say in her work and tell her to back down or else because of mob mentality. But this is where it gets real. Is a few weeks ago there was a video which I'm sure you either watched or you heard of, and it was right in the beginning of all this race relation upheaval, and it was a woman who was walking her dog and she let it off the leash, and a black guy came and was just like, "Ma'am, put your dog on a leash," and yada yada. It comes down to is she made a racist remark. She's a white woman and she says, "I'm going to call the police on you." So she calls the police and says, "A black man is threatening me." Now, her bringing up his race is what made it racist. Is she was saying you should be concerned because he's black, not just because a man is antagonizing me and I don't like him. No, the fact that she brought in his race is what made it racist. And we can condemn that as gross behavior and despicable behavior. And she should not have said that. She should not have, targeted this man based on the color of his skin. And I'm sure that there's more information. But essentially what happened, it's not so much that part, the race part of it, that I care about. And that's why I didn't comment on it at the time. But the reason why I'm bringing it up now is because her life is part of cancel culture. 5 seconds ago, she was a nobody from nowhere who nobody had ever heard of and nobody ever would hear of. But what happened is a bad moment in her life, a gross moment in her life, came up, was recorded, went viral on the internet, and she herself was canceled. She lost her job over it. She lost her pet over it. She lost probably her reputation. She probably lost friends over it. There are severe consequences because in the world of social media, we have all to some degree become public figures. Our lives are all they're all available to be scrutinized. The moment someone whips out their phone, whether you even realize it or not, you are all of a sudden in danger of your worst moment becoming the defining moment of your life, or a defining moment of your life, a complete tipping point. This woman, goodness, I can't help but feel bad for her, because even though she behaved in a gross way and had gross behavior, and we can call it out for the behavior that it is and not condone it, at the same time, I can't help but think, what if that was you or me? Because I'm not saying all of us would make a racist comment, but imagine if the worst moment or a very bad moment of your life was recorded and that's all the world saw of you. They didn't see every other good thing that you've done, but they caught a 30-second clip of a very bad worst moment of your life, or just a very negative moment, maybe not even the worst, but it became the worst because the world decided to target you because of social media and because of the access the internet gives us all to each other. And that's why I bring this up, is I think that what happened to this woman is dangerous. She lost her livelihood over this. Her life has been deeply impacted, probably for the rest of her life, because of a very bad move on her part. And I can't help but pity her, but also be alarmed, because that could be you or I. You or I, it doesn't matter if you're on the right or on the left or an alien. If you get caught on camera doing something less than ideal or saying something less than ideal, it could wreak havoc on your life. And that is why I feel like we're going too far. Cancel culture is not just something that's for Hollywood and those who decide to speak up, who are already in the public atmosphere. J.K. Rowling is being targeted. She's already in the public sphere. But this woman was not in the public sphere. I don't even know what her name is. All I know is that probably what felt like the entire world defined who she is based on a terrible moment. And she's probably been the recipient of hate that you and I can't even fully comprehend. And death threats. The death threats are unreal online. And this brings me to the time I got fired. And I feel like, obviously, I've not been the target of cancel culture anywhere at near what this woman went through and many other people have gone through. But it gave me a tiny taste of what it could feel like and what it can do to an individual's life. I haven't talked about it up until now, and I don't want to get too personal or detailed, because I respect that previous employer's, decision to do what they felt like was best for them. But essentially, I was working for an individual, and without being descriptive or giving any information about them, because I respect their privacy, I was working for an individual, and my family, some family members, some cousins of mine who lived in Sonora, Mexico, were traveling, and I talked about this in depth on an episode called The Attack on My LeBaron Family. And these cousins of mine were just terrorized by the Mexican mafia and were gunned down, and all the mothers and many children were killed. And I spoke about this because at first we couldn't get any attention. I say we as in while I'm not immediately connected to these family members, they're cousins of mine, but their immediate family, their husbands and immediate family members, parents were absolutely just panicked that this was going to be completely covered up by the Mexican government, and basically everyone and their dog in my family was desperate to get some kind of media attention on this so that there could be some kind of justice, essentially. And so I spoke about this within 24 hours of this happening. I believe I spoke about this on social media, and I said, hey guys, please don't let this go away. My family members have been hurt, they've been shot at, they've been killed. Don't let this go away. Well, it ended up exploding. President Trump tweeted about it. It became a worldwide news story for about a week, because that's how our news cycle works. Well, in the course of that, within about one day of me posting about it on my Instagram page, which is relatively small, I have maybe around, somewhere around 40 and 50,000 followers. So it's relatively small in the social media world. And I, for whatever reason, had enough of you, thank God for you, bring attention to this horrible tragedy that various news media outlets where I locally lived in Florida reached out to me and said, can you please talk about this? And of course I said yes. I wanted this to go out. I wanted this injustice to be known about. So did the rest of my family member. And so I did. And the employers of who I was working for at the time, they saw, they never told me what they saw. I don't know if it was my social media post or something on their local news, but they found out that the women and children killed in Mexico were my cousins, and they immediately fired me. They fired me for speaking about it. They fired me. They wouldn't be 100% specific as to why they fired me, but basically for speaking out about it, for the fact that it had become politicized because Trump was talking about it, because maybe for some reason they thought it would reflect on their family or their business or whatever. I don't know, their livelihoods. I don't know. They wouldn't be specific with me, but they did make it clear that they were firing me that day, and they didn't even tell me in person. They called and texted me, but they made it known to me that day that I was no longer welcome to work for them, and it made me realize for the first time that what I say on social media and what I speak about on social media can and probably will have a lifelong impact on me, whether or not I get a job later, in a different area, whether or not I get a promotion in that area, whether or not employers are willing to hire me because I'm outspoken about abortion, whether or not employers are willing to hire me because I'm honest about my very diverse family background with polygamy and such. It made me realize, it was a reality check for me, that what I say on social media matters, because even if it could go unnoticed for years and years, or I could have a relatively small audience in the world of social media, that it only takes the right person seeing it and it can explode in your face. And this has happened many, many times. There's even just a story I didn't plan on talking about today, but a guy had a private text message conversation with an employee, I believe, and then it got leaked and it wreaked havoc on his life. So what I'm trying to say is we're not immune to cancel culture. It is a real issue, and it's something that we need to really think deeply about, how deeply we're going to make people pay for their private opinions and their either their private opinions or even their public opinions that they're willing to speak about publicly, whether or not we're going to let that affect our private interactions with them, whether or not we're going to boycott their business or boycott them as a human. There's just a lot to think about. And cancel culture isn't just something that's controlled by the left. It's controlled by each and every one of us because we take part in it. So this is just a moment I'm asking you to take to realize where this can take us, the devastating effects it can have on others and also on yourself. Every time you see one of these situations, no matter how despicable the other person's actions are in your mind, I want you to think about, what if that was you talking about abortion? What if that was you talking about your family being killed in Mexico? What if that was anything that you believe in and that came forward and really affected your life? all that to say, it's worth thinking about. It's worth being aware of and thinking about how that's going to affect our culture and affect your life personally. This week's good in the world that we're going to end on is there's a sweet story of a 6-year-old boy who, you know, he realized his nanny or his babysitter wasn't going to get to go to prom, so he set up he got all dressed up and had her get dressed up, and he escorted her to a homemade prom, which I thought was so sweet. And just, it also speaks to his parents, wanting to look out for other people. This is community. This is what communities are for. It's about uplifting our friends and family and neighbors and people who are in our lives, and I thought it was such a sweet story I wanted to share with you. That's it for today. Thank you for joining me. God bless you. God bless America. Hey, thanks for joining me on this episode. Really appreciate it. Every one of your shares with friends and family means a lot. It helps the channel grow. Not only that, but it's the reason why I keep producing this content is because of your positive and sometimes negative and constructive feedback. So thank you so much. You can always reach me at conservativebabes@gmail.com. Send me your hate mail or your letters with constructive criticism or anything you have to say. I check that email all the time, conservativebabes@gmail.com, and I'll eventually get back with you, or message me on Instagram. Please subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the notification bell, and if you are listening on iTunes, you know what to do. Leave a 5-star review. Thank you.